So my name is Brian Baker. I'm the Systems Director of Spiritual Care for ArnotHealth, which comprises St. Joe's Hospital, the Arnott Ogden Medical Center, and Ira Davenport Memorial Hospital, Taylor, Friend Harriet Taylor Rehab Facility up in Bath. So that's me. Former CPE student, working on that old BCC thing. Bill?
And hang on a second, what was the title? It was, I thought I heard Bill say he changed the title. So Bill, can you introduce the title as you introduce
Y'all
yourself?
see the screen?
I can now. Yeah.
Everybody see the screen with the title?
Yes.
All right.
We can do it.
So I'm Bill Reynolds, and I'm also a certified educator working with Marianne at Crossroads of Caring, and I am currently at Arnott. I've been there the last 2 years at St. Joseph's, and in that context, I've been leading spirituality groups and self-care groups on the behavioral health unit inpatient and the addiction recovery inpatient, along with Brian. Brian does a group there too, and now recently an outpatient group. So something we're going to be talking about today. It's very experiential. We have a lot of experience here, and other people who could very well do this presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But these practices have been evolving for me for the last 25 years plus. Particularly when I went to University of Rochester Medical Center and started doing inpatient groups in the child and adolescent, and we had 3 adult inpatient psychiatric units, including geriatric psych. And I also did the methadone clinic, led a spirituality group for them at one point. So these are tried and true, and I keep experimenting and keep working with it. And I certainly welcome you all to bring your ideas, practices that you utilize. We're going to throw in a little theory here that have shaped us, both of us. But anyway, mostly this is going to be experiential. So Brian, why don't you start?
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? I look like I'm frozen on my end, so I'm a little scared.
We can hear you, Brian.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So we're actually going to start with a question of the day, something that my chaplain, Tim, loves to do to people. I want you to take a minute. For those of you who are driving and such, this is not a safe practice, right? But you can always share. Typically, what today I want to know from you is what are your, and you can put them in the chat, please, if you can. If not, you can just shout them out at some point. I want to know your 3 favorite holiday movies. 3 favorite holiday movies. Or shows or whatever.
Oops, sorry. Anybody want to go and just say it, throw it out there?
Say it. Yeah, we're taking forever.
Mine is in order. Mine is Elf, A Christmas Story, and It's a Wonderful Life. Anyone else?
Don't jump the gun, Bill.
I'll be the Grinch here and say I really don't like Christmas.
Okay. But you have no shows that you tend to watch around Christmas time? Nothing? 0?
Say, sounds like a category for a candidate for the Grinch, but
yeah, perhaps.
I like the Christmas Carol.
Yeah, there you go. Christmas Carol.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is classic.
Home Alone.
Home Alone is good too.
Fiona, are there Hanukkah movies? Are there other holiday
There's one with Mayor winning
things?
how the wit that she goes home and it's like a really horribly dysfunctional family.
I don't know if there was an answer there. I couldn't hear.
I don't know. She may be moving inside.
All right. Yeah, I don't see her on anymore. Anyway, I want you to just take a moment and look at some of the responses and think about some of the responses. Typically, what we have here is a group of experience, movies, shows, things that are culturally similar for a lot of us. I see some people went ahead and actually named the same things. You know, It's a Wonderful Life, Die Hard. Tim and I are obviously in the Die Hard is a Christmas movie subgroup, right? The point of the question of the day is to draw out some sort of common experience amongst people. Or if you're using it individually one-on-one, is to get to know them a little bit better and have an idea. I use this occasionally in my groups. It can be a fun way to do an icebreaker, or there are other options available, right? You can find out, to Siona's point, not Christian. I would have asked, I said, so in this world that inundates people around Christmas in America, there are no shows that you wind up watching because they're just kind of good and universal. There are plenty of those on the Hallmark Channel, et cetera, et cetera. Often the way that a person answers the question is more important than the answer to the question, right? How willing are people to become engaged in the group process? Usually, some people can enter into the group process very willingly and readily, especially if they are accustomed to 12-step groups or group work. Other people may be very hesitant to do so. And often when they initially find out over something innocuous, seemingly innocuous, their favorite candy bar, their favorite type of pie, their favorite holiday movie, this will allow a way for them to enter into the discussion in a way that's a little less stress-filled. So that, while we were doing it for us, it's kind of like just a general show of what we can do. Bill, can you hit the next slide, please? This is something I do, the general feelings check-in. So in our office and for our employee engagement thing, we have this big, super huge feelings wheel. But in pretty much every addiction recovery and mental health unit that I have seen a feelings chart. You are probably aware of these charts. Ultimately, when I get on a unit, I kind of want to know a couple of things, especially like in the addiction recovery unit. It's a 28-day facility. I want to know who they are. I want to know how long they've been there, and I want to know what they are feeling in the moment, with good and great and super not necessarily being feelings, but more like states. Typically, what we have is at the center of the wheel, we have the bigger buckets, right? Anger, happiness. These are sadness. These are like the big buckets that we tend to throw things in. And what I want to know usually is I want to know what they're feeling. And then I usually push down on that a little more, and I ask them about the bodily sensation of that feeling, right? So what does happen? I feel happy. What does that, oh, you look really light when you say that, or you can see people opening up, or you can tell when somebody says they're angry, or you can say, well, what type of anger is it? Are you frustrated about something? Are you despairing about something? Are you miffed? Are you hangry? What are you? What does that look like? Where are you experiencing that in their body? Again, so much of what I think I'm dealing with in these various groups is people want to stay outside of the room with their cares and concerns, and I'm usually more trying to draw them into the space where I'm working with them and others to figure out what a joint experience might look like. I usually go one-on-one, by the way, very quickly. These are answers that are generally quick. And then based on what I'm hearing in the group, then I can move on to the next step. So Bill, can you hit the next slide? All right. So this is sort of the heart of the work that I know that Bill has been focused on this quite a bit. But functional subgrouping a la Agazarian, right? So in most of us who have worked with Bill or Marianne with their IPR, ultimately what we're doing in a group dynamic is that we are integrating differences and finding similarities. That's the long story short, right? So if I have a group of 12 addicts or 10 people in the behavioral unit, what I'm trying to help people do is to moderate similarities and differences. How are you feeling? Oh, we have a happy subgroup. We have a sad subgroup. We have a frustrated subgroup. And often I'm the one who has to ask that critical question anyone else, like what Bill just did, right? Does anybody else feel that way? Does anybody else want to join in on this feeling? can anyone understand what this person is feeling or have a similarity that they would like to share? Obviously, when we're training as chaplains and we were sitting around the table, you all remember what it was like sitting in those first few weeks of IPR and how difficult it was. I'll try to clean up my language for this presentation. It can be really hard. And I think it's really hard for most people to identify their feelings, even on a day-to-day to moment-to-moment level, let alone trying to explain or tap into the feelings of others in an empathic way. It can be tough, right? So having an opening whereby we ask these questions, we identify various groups. So let's say I'm on the ARU and I have a happy subgroup, a sad subgroup, and a frustrated subgroup. I can then ask the group, well, these are the ones that I identified. What would the group like to explore right here? It sounds like we have a couple of different ways to go. And then usually there's a couple strong voices or people are like, well, I'm willing to explore that. Even though I'm feeling slightly different, maybe I'm not in that place. I would like to hear about the frustrated subgroup. And then we're off to the races, right? Then we have a theme to start working around. You go back to your core people who initially expressed that, say a little more. And then as a moderator, I would say anyone else, right? Can you join in? And then obviously in some areas, for me, it's a little more directive in terms of my practice, right? Because as you all know, in certain settings, people can go off into war stories or storytelling or perseverating or controlling narrative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to keep people on track and then taking out a core message that they might be, can I rephrase that in a way? Is this what you're saying? And then ask that pointed question of others. Anyone else feeling this way? Does anybody have a similar experience, right? And as time goes on, and this is the lovely comment about down below by Susan Gant, which is as time goes on, the narrative itself from the group becomes more evolved and richer and more discriminating. It allows the space to open up for people to share more deeply, and it sort of engenders a system of trust as people are opening up. And sometimes people go surprisingly deep with this process at the first go around. If you are careful and sort of set the guardrails and the boundaries, it's a wonderful thing. And again, Bill and I do primarily our ARU, where we're really committed to seeing people. I'm committed to seeing people 4 times during their stay up there. So is Bill, for that matter. So we're working with people, and sometimes we're working in tandem. We're asking similar types of questions in 2 different settings. I do a spirituality group. Bill does more of a skills and coping group, but they complement one another. Our vocabulary sort of overlaps in a way. We pass information to each other about what an individual patient may have shared, or stories or narratives that came up, and who has been more involved in the process and who hasn't. So I have a question that came up from Tiona. What questions do I ask to get the first question out in the room? Usually what I'm asking, in my ARU group, my addiction recovery unit, literally my first question is, who are you? How long have you been here? And what are you currently feeling? Right? I don't always know who's on the floor. Usually on any given day, if I go up once or twice a week, there are new faces almost every time. Some people may have been there previously, but coming on the unit, or if they're in their first 72 hours after coming in, they may have no clean time at all. So they may have been, I've had people come who do not remember me from the previous week because they were essentially high, right? So, or their medication was so crazy, messed up that it was difficult. So the follow-up question are the Agazarian exercises after intros. Well, the Agazarian, like I said, I ask people how they're feeling briefly, and then I use that in a directive manner in order to form some functional subgroups. John and Jane both said that they were feeling really angry. Tom and Tim said that they were feeling really frustrated. So we have a couple different subgroups. We like to explore subgroup A or B, and then we can dig a little deeper, right? It's very surface level initially. It's very surface level.
we're going to give you some questions here with the self-compassion vital signs.
So we're going to get into some more skills, but this is just some of the minor theory behind it at the moment.
So let me just say really briefly, and we got to move, but
yeah, we got a lot.
Anton Boyson did his first unit of CPE in 1920, Worcester State Hospital in Massachusetts, and he writes in his autobiography about the creating a community of suffering. People in a psychiatric hospital in the 1920s, if you can imagine that, right? And then Agazarian, her first work with anyone else started in an inpatient psychiatric context where she recognized both Boyson and Agazarian recognized that one of the profound experience for people who are mentally ill is loneliness and feeling like no one else is anxious, no one else is depressed, no one else is having disturbing thoughts. And the technique, anyone else, it's quite powerful. And the report of folks in groups, I know y'all know this, others of you who've led groups, they say, when I'm inpatient, when I'm in the hospital, I have friends who care, friends who get it, friends who understand what it's like. That's the power of community. That's the power of that connectedness. Agazarian's clinical work with subgrouping, but anyone else is your ticket there.
That's good. Take it away, Bill. You got the next slide anyway.
All right. So I've been informed by Cynthia Bourgeau's work. She's an Episcopal priest, Christian mystic, teacher, wisdom teacher, influenced by Gurdjieff's work called The Work and the Enneagram and the three centers of knowing: body, thinking, and feeling. And also Vanderkolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, that accessing our body and movement and music and dance can be very powerful, that the body has information, and that sometimes the body is the pathway to that settled nervous system. And Rest Momentum and many others, Marianne knows this theory, and the brain science on some of this. But I try to always, one of my goals is to help people connect with their body and their settled nervous system. Their parasympathetic nervous system, Minicum calls it the soul nerve. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to show you, we don't have time to just all of us do this, but I really slow down. I'm intense. I can be too quick talking like I'm doing right now. But when I enter the unit, I just try to go into a very centered place, very slow, very calm. And on my Sunday spirituality group, this is how we start. And I do it on the nursing home too. I even got Presbyterians doing this when I was at First Pres. So if you can get Presbyterians to do this practice in church, it's amazing. So I'm going to just go through the 5 poses. You can do it seated. You can do it standing. I'm going to stand up and show you. And there's different language you can use. You can make it, more from your tradition. The first position is find your feet. That's a Cynthia Bourgeau Gurdjieff phrase. Just find your feet, that balanced posture where you can feel like you can move easily left to right. I connected with martial arts. Those who do martial arts, finding that balanced position, and then hands toward the earth like this. And just hold that pose. As you do this, and I tell them this, I'm going to talk you through it the first time. We're going to do it in silence the second time. If your body wants to move in other ways, let your body move the way it wants. There's no right or wrong way to do this. So hands toward the earth, connect with the earth beneath us. And then put your hands together. A gentle bow, like in martial arts or in prayer or respect toward others. I hold it longer than I'm doing now. Reach your hands up, a big stretch up. Feel that stretch. Opening yourself up. And then hold yourself around your heart center with compassion and gentleness. Feel that gentleness toward yourself. Breathe into that space. And then reach out. Take taking in all of us in the group and all that's around us in the whole world. And then back to our beginning. Now I do it even slower than that, and then we do it 2 times in silence. So here's my question. At this point, I don't ask, what are you feeling? The 2 phrases I use are, what are you experiencing right now? And again, one of my goals is to orient people to the here and now. So what are you experiencing? I'd like 2 of you just to say, it just helped me. What are you experiencing right now? Watching me lead that. Some of you are working alongside seated. I saw, what are you experiencing right now?
I'm feeling some tingling in my upper torso and some freedom in my hands.
Anyone else?
Warmth.
Warmth, nice. Anybody else?
Impressed.
What's that?
Impressed.
Impressed. Okay, so what I often experience, because when we do this, it takes a bit to do it 3 times through and slower. Go ahead. Somebody say something? I thought somebody said.
Plant's getting settled.
Okay, so people will say, I feel like my thoughts slowed down. Great data. I feel more relaxed. I've had people say just peaceful from that. And then I'll say something like, the body knows. The body has wisdom. That's Vanderhoek. Body knows. And if the mind is angry, you'll hear with the breath practice, but just the slowing down. All right, we got to move. I'm going back to share. Okay, this is something I use from the Jewish scripture, and I chant it, but mostly I just read it. I've had folks in the behavioral health unit put this on their door. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still, be. And you can do it as a 1-note chant. Be still and know that I am God. All the way through. Again, what are you experiencing right now? What are you aware of right now? 7 breaths. So Brian and I are leading an outpatient group, and we've got some really anxious people. And with folks who deal with a lot of anxiety, I learned this from a good friend of mine who's a therapist. Some folks who are anxious, that even 7 breaths is really difficult. The latest one I've been doing is one I learned from a therapist at Arnott at St. Joseph's. Breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. Go all the way through. That's 5 breaths. Come back. There's something about using your hand. Again, it connects with the body. And I know some of y'all use other techniques. And as long as it's part of your practice and you own it and you can do it in a centered, settled way, it can work. But I've had people say it's really hard with 7 breaths. But 7 breaths, or whether you use this technique, people will often say, oh, I feel like my thoughts slow down.
Can I chime in real quick too,
Bill? Or I feel more relaxed, or just any number of words. Go ahead, Brian.
Right. So obviously we know a bunch of different breath practices, whether you want to call it box breathing or resistance breathing or what have you. There's one thing that I do offer for some of my folk who are sort of in immediate crisis, right? And I'm sure some of you are aware of this term. It's the physiological sigh, right? If you're on the hospital at some point, you'll notice that when people are entering units, leaving units, getting on the elevator, they do a big sigh. You do it too, but you probably don't recognize it. Once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. Now, the sigh itself is an emotional reset, and the physiological sigh, I'll just do it really quick. You breathe in and then add a little bit more at the end. You go. Your exhale needs to be longer than your inhale. So breathe in through your nose, add a little more, and then breathe out. Why does this work? Well, there's a lot of science behind why it works and the way your facial muscles work and the fact that you can actually control your diaphragm. But the key is that it actually sort of opens you up, creates space, and people can often use this to relax in an immediate way to help control their anxiety. If you think about the times when you're really worked up and you get really flustered about what you're saying, our almost always natural reaction is to do what? Right? We know what we're doing. Well, we're doing it, but we don't know that we're doing it. But you can actually control that breath work. And the key to that, the reason I bring this up is because it's something in the immediate, because we don't always have a way to get away or to do a more focused breathing or a lot of their breathing practice. But try that when you're trying to go to sleep at night, by the way. That will almost do that about 10 or 15 times. You'll notice how it affects your body. Anyway, I just wanted to jump in and throw that out there. That's one that I use quite a bit for people who are starting to get really amped up. So.
That's great. And if any of y'all have techniques you use, you want to chime in, please do so. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh. I've been doing this a while. And then Agazarian, and my trainers, Rich O'Neill and Susan Gant, doing a body scan, sitting under a waterfall, shower, perfect water temperature, or a warm light. Some people like warm light of the sun all the way down your body for reducing tension. So that's another thing that can help people, particularly if you've got people who are noticing tension in their bodies. I got this from, so I do spirituality groups and self-care groups, but I've been using this some now on the ARU and the BSU from Anne Lamont. I've added silence. And wow, I've had to qualify because the younger folks in their 20s and 30s, wow, can be cynical. Wow. But she's talking about awe and wonder. But I had this on a sheet, and then I give them some time to fill it out, and help. And of course, in addiction, you can't be in recovery by yourself. You can't recover alone. What do you need help with? Gratitude. We're going to talk about gratitude practice. It's evidence-based. And by the way, I've got all these handouts in Word that I can send to you all if you want. Minicum does a lot with humming and belly rubbing. And at first, when I've now read Minicum, I think 4 times now. I was so skeptical of humming and belly rubbing, and I don't do it in a new group. But as Brian said, when you got that core group, people in program 28 days, humming is very powerful. Do something simple. I generally start with "You Are My Sunshine." And then anyone else have a song you want to hum? And in the ARU once they wanted to do the Baby Shark song. So it got really playful, really fun, really silly. They started laughing. Humming can take us to that silly place too, that place of play. But Minicum talks about what you're doing there. We got a quote later, but you're literally harmonizing your bodies. And then belly rubbing, I was so mistrustful of belly rubbing, but I've started to introduce that. I always do it in a clockwise motion. A massage therapist taught me that years ago. And it can be very powerful. And I had a 20-something-year-old in the addiction recovery unit one day. We did it. I started with the humming. First, start with the body prayer. Go to the humming. Do belly rubbing. I said, we're going to do an advanced class today. We're going to do belly rubbing. Everybody ready? And name the self-consciousness that a lot of us have self-consciousness about our bellies, the size of our bellies. But that's a very important place for us of relaxation. So this 20-something, young guy. He was 21, 22, very young. He says, "This is the most relaxed I have been in years from belly rubbing in a group." And we were literally harmonizing our bodies. So read Minicum. It's my grandmother's hands. It's such a tour de force of a book. I do the Serenity Prayer, the full version, and I focus on the verbs, particularly, this is the part everybody knows, right? So these participles, I know they're better grammarians: living, enjoying, accepting, taking. I tried to change that, Brian, last Christ and God, but trusting. So again, those verbs: living, enjoying, accepting, taking, trusting. So I went in a spirituality group on ARU on Sunday, and also on Sunday in the behavioral health unit. Often we use the full version of the Serenity Prayer, and a great place to introduce the prayer, have someone read it, and then what do you identify with? Anyone else?
And I would say that for anybody who's doing any chaplaincy work, at least knowing the beginning of the Serenity Prayer should be mandatory. There are so many people that have done 12-step that resonate with that prayer. It can be a really powerful intervention on its own, just on its own.
So I created this a little over a year ago on the addiction recovery unit, and it's a little worksheet, and with three verbs again, with space for them to do some reflection and share whatever they wish to share. So that's also very important. You don't have to share this. This is for you only, but if you want to share, would anyone like to share what they wrote on one or all of these? Very simple, right? I admit, I believe, I decide, and really orient it to the here and now, to today, going back to one day at a time, one moment at a time. This has been quite powerful. And I'm sure y'all know about mindfulness. I love the quote by John Kabat-Zinn: "If you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you." So that connects to some of the breath practices and body work. Gratitude, as you all know, I'm sure a lot of you know that it's evidence-based. When they first did the research, they thought three things. Gratitude journal was the magic number, but they actually found that if you just came up with one thing and really felt it in your body viscerally, noticing your body sensations, that one thing, didn't have to be 3 things a day, one thing, daily practice that you're grateful for. And then Brian.
So I've been doing a slight variant of this based on some research that came out. I have people think of a time when they were the recipient of gratitude. I have a gentleman in one of our outpatient groups who is always worried about what other people will think of him. And he recounted a story where he's a mechanic, and he came across a mother with 5 kids on a back road, and he was worried that he was going to creep on him, but he just couldn't drive by him. And all it was a flat tire. So he changed the tire. And the little girl came up and hugged him and said, "Thank you." And reliving that story, he was literally weeping, right? So the point of this is, when I use this on the ARU in particular, I ask people, this is like a homework assignment. Think of a time when you were the recipient of gratitude, bullet point it, and then you can sort of tell yourself the story in the bullet points. And it has a really significant impact on our affect and how we view ourselves. Now, it can be hard. Some people will initially be resistant, but almost everybody has received gratitude at some point or another, or witnessed it firsthand. So it's not just saying, well, I'm thankful. A lot of people say, I'm thankful for being alive, I'm thankful for breathing, I'm glad I didn't OD. That's all well and good. But actually, it brings them back to their body and that physical experience of being important, of having agency, of making a difference, right? Because a lot of people, especially in these units, don't feel like they do, or they're so bound by guilt and shame, it can be really hard. So I've used that with some people, and it's been very successful. It's just a different form of a gratitude practice.
That's really great. And Brian, maybe we could you could find that article and share that with the group when we send out the if people want the handouts. So gratitude's the one thing I do every single time, every single group. And it's also a place where you can say anybody else want to share gratitude? What are you grateful for today? And sometimes they'll join each other. Well, I'm grateful for my kids too. Number one answer over the last 25 years, if I have been keeping stats, number one answer is I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be alive. And I'm grateful that I woke up this morning. And as you all know, you'll have somebody says, I'm not grateful. I'm not glad I'm alive. Try to get a subgroup. Anybody else having some of those disturbing thoughts? Yes, I had those too. Agatharian was all about normalizing, legitimizing, humanizing, universalizing human experience. Welcoming practice. This was Thich Nhat Hanh. There's a great YouTube talk where he talks about anger with Ram Dass. And Thich Nhat Hanh talks about holding your anger with the same gentleness, the same compassion as if you were holding a newborn baby, a very young baby. So I did this one time in a group for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's. So who was in the room were not the people with Alzheimer's or dementia, Lewy body and such, but were caregivers. And I introduced this practice, and I really learned something from the introduction. Whatever you're experiencing, a stress, a challenge, worry, sadness, whatever it is. By the way, you haven't seen Inside Out 1 and 2. Go see that because there's so much with that. But simply hold it in your awareness with gentleness and compassion. So I had a man in the group who got furious at me. And he said, my son was murdered, and I could never have compassion and gentleness. So make the distinction. This is not about the situation or the person. It's about your human feeling. It's about holding your experience of sadness, anger, loneliness with gentleness, compassion. And so I struggle with self-doubt a lot, those of y'all who know me temperamentally. So, and I do these things and say, what do people think about all this? So I had a guy who went from the BSU up to the ARU. And here's what he told me. He said, I've been thinking about what you said about holding my feelings with gentleness, like my feelings are a baby inside of me. This is a 22, 23-year-old man. He said, that was so helpful to me. He said, that's such a powerful image. So it's a practice I do with myself. Haiku, y'all don't worry about the form, but I do introduce the form with the people who like the 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable. I will do the classic translation. There's evidently, I don't speak Japanese, but evidently there's all of them are poor translation of the classic haiku about the frog jumping in the pond. But these are 3 poems from the ARU when I did it recently. And it's just breathtaking. Just read these 3 poems. Let these poems into your heart. These were written by addicts. Two people, 3 people. What are you experiencing reading these poems?
Bill, can I ask you, what did you do to set the tone so people could write these?
I start with the body prayer. I start with breathing. So I'm building all this. So today we're going to write. And I know some of y'all probably don't like to write. How many of you don't like to write? How many people like to write? You got 2 subgroups. I like to write. I don't like to write. And invariably, I said, well, today we're going to try writing. Now, in ARU, they do a lot of writing. They have journals. So that's not new. But I said, don't worry about the words. Just put words together. And people will often say, I didn't know I had these words in me. And I said, don't worry about the 5-syllable 7-5. Some people really like that, working with the structure. And as you can see, not all these they're free form, but they're simple, they're short. And I say haiku is often about nature, what we can see outside the window, or what's happening in the present moment, here and now. I keep always coming back, present moment, here and now. That's the goal of the group, orient the here and now, body, thinking, feeling. Anybody want to say what they're experiencing when you read these poems by three addicts? Okay. All right.
Well, I don't mind.
Go.
I think in what I'm experiencing is that is that they are feeling that they're not just an addict.
Right. Right. That's their hearing now experience. Yeah. In the present moment, they're not. In that group, they're not an addict. They're tapping in their true self, right? Feel that it's all we have. There's no turning back. It feels like everything. These are powerful phrases. They just, I just want to meditate when I read them. Anybody else?
The one that says feeling refreshed now, riding the wave, there's no turning back. It just reminds me of being on an ocean, very peaceful and the waters and so forth. So that really, kind of got my attention. So, and I guess the picture there of this person in the waters here, that this, reminds me of something peaceful.
All right. Thank you. So this is one I do toward the end of the group. Think of a person, an animal, or a place that makes you feel safe and secure. Often I'll start with the place. Could be inside, outside, your room, your porch, by a creek, special place in nature. You can be alone, or if you want someone there, person that accepts you as you are, you feel totally safe. Slow it way, way down. It's kind of a visualization. There's a quote by Meister Eckhart, 14th or late 13th, early 14th century mystic, Christian mystic. He said, if I were alone in the desert feeling afraid, I would want a child to be with me. Then my fear would disappear and I would be made strong. But if I could not have a child with me, I would like to have at least a living animal by my side to comfort me. And that's what Minnekens tapped into. I doubt that Minnekens read Meister Eckhart, but the wisdom has been, it's always available. So I love this quote. What we bring to these groups is mostly our settled nervous system. And I'm not always settled, just those of you know me. But that's what multiplies in the group. The body's harmonized. That's why, what do you experience? I'm feeling calmer. I'm feeling peaceful. I'm feeling relaxed. Anyone else? Yeah, I'm feeling that too. Our body's harmonized. That's why groups are so important. Groups are where it's at.
And even if people aren't necessarily feeling harmonized, usually you're able to bring people within that state where they can actually start to regulate emotionally, right? There's a tendency toward the middle of the group. So it can help people who may be less likely to participate at the beginning tend to become more likely to, and people who are overactivated tend to calm. So you could see it happen. I mean, I've seen it happen, I don't know how many hundreds of times now, where people who were initially shut off when entering the group become open and more vulnerable as time goes on. People who are overly activated start to regulate and want to participate. And it's actually pretty amazing to watch.
So, Tiana, these are the 5 questions. I do this a lot. Again, the gratitude question, one thing I like for many people, not for a number of people, it's really hard for them to say one thing they like about themselves. Then you get a subgroup for that. And we've had powerful subgroup around self-hatred, self-judgment, self-criticism, being really hard on ourselves. One thing I want to let go of, one thing I enjoy doing just for me, and one goal I have for the future. And the future might be tomorrow or the remainder of this day. So these are the self-compassion vital signs. I give them time to fill it out, 5 minutes or so, watch the group. Some people are still writing. Some people are really getting into it. Be aware you may have people who do not read, do not write. So you can draw. And this one gentleman, he confessed to me, he said, Bill, I've never learned to read. So he and I did, and he's a frequent flyer. So he and I, when he's there, we do it one-on-one. He's a homeless guy. And we go through these questions one-on-one together. This is homegrown, self-compassion, body, mind, relationships, higher power. It's not a perfect diagram, and there are places where they overlap, but just again, have them talk about what do you do, and talking more about self-compassion now, which is where the literature is going. When you're having compassion for yourself, what are you doing to take care of your body? And sometimes it's very simple things. The other day in ARU, I wanted to make my bed today, and I did that. I wanted to take a shower. Well, people who are depressed, brushing your teeth can be a definitely a source of your self-compassion. And then mind, relationships, higher power, and relationships, your NA group, your AA group, any 12-step group, friends, family, and some people really have limitations there, really struggle to find those connections. So I do this and have them share as they want. And I've had some amazing responses to this, to the 4 circles. And again, we can make your own. This is very hand drawn. I want to do one last. I want to do this last meditation. This is the last thing I do. I want to end with this today when we're right at the last minute or two. But right now, we're just going to open it up to questions, comments, things you do. I'm sure there are things you do that are tried and true. These are the practices that I use and Brian's using. And I continue to experiment with humming and belly rubbing and read Minicum. If you haven't read that book, it's a tour de force. Great on this stuff.
I do have a quick question. Would we be able to have something sent to our email with the materials that we went over today? Oh,
Yeah.
Great. That's super.
Yeah, I'm gonna send all these to Aaron, and so you can have them all in Word.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Great.
I really like how you bring everything back to the subgroups, that even not being able to answer a question, even not being able to express a feeling is an opportunity to bring it back to subgroups. Is anybody else struggling with this? Can anybody else, be in this boat? And it never occurred to me to use the not being able to in that way. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we often encounter is that, and we do this with our IPR too, right? Every voice is a voice for the group, regardless, right? And so if people are feeling frustrated, or even that is not, usually people aren't alone in that either. So that those feelings of frustration or being their own worst critic, like up in the ARU, that's like one of the most common things. They beat themselves up. They feel so much guilt and shame that it may be impossible to find that one thing they like about themselves in that moment. But that experience of self-judgment is something they can say, well, I feel that way too. Oh, I'm not alone. And even that can be healing, to realize that it's not just me who feels this way.
And if somebody says something like, I like my left earlobe, do you just leave it alone?
I can join liking my left earlobe. Me too.
Yeah, so I'm sure y'all have had the bizarre moments too that happen, and yeah, it's always interesting, always different.
Yeah, but you're right. Sometimes some things seem to come out of left field, but there are usually ways that you can reframe. That's where your job as a moderator or your skills and direction can come in handy. So.
Yep.
Trusting that gut, I think, is important. I'm sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
No, you go first.
No, I was just going to say the reframing and the stuff that comes out of left field can be really rich at times. I had just an experience this past week in a group where this woman, before I started sharing what I was going to share, she just shared these kind of non sequiturs, but they were definitely sequiturs. When I opened it, she goes, what do you think that means? And I just opened it a little bit and kind of riffed to say, maybe it means this. And she was like, wow, maybe it does mean that. So often holding up a mirror back to maybe interpret a scheme that feels like just an earlobe, maybe it's bigger than that.
Right.
Wayne, what were you going to say?
I was just thinking about the the problem that comes along with people using language like higher power, that sets the divine as a separate being. And I've really been moved by Elizabeth Johnson's work. She's a nun who teaches at Fordham, and she talks about the problems of having a separate God. She says, what if the divine is the essence of relationship itself? Mm-hmm. And when you look at it that way, there's no way, then the divine is sort of like gravity. It's always, always, always there. You can't get away from it, and it can't get away from you. And in the spiritually integrated psychotherapy training, I use the definition of spirituality as the quality of relatedness. And a lot of what I have seen in these experiences you've been talking about today is that it really helps people to develop their quality of relatedness to themselves, to one another, to their families, to their own bodies, all of that. And so it just seems important to me to be aware of how scary the idea of higher power can be, how hierarchical that is. And an awful lot of these people in your program, their experience has been that the people who have power in their lives have been awful to them. So just wanted to add that.
Wayne,
angle.
that's a really important point. And I just want to say that for me, when I start my groups up in the ARU, it's a spirituality group. And I start off in my opening patter with people is, this is a spirituality group. It is not a religion group. I'm not here to preach, teach, proselytize, or make you believe anything other than what you do. When I talk spirituality, I'm talking about relationships, those things that keep you connected, help you tick, give you focus, help you plan. And you can call it whatever you want. But ultimately, that's what we're here to talk about. What's going to help you leverage that and help you stay sober and deal with the trauma that you're trying to deal with while you're here, right? And that usually, and you can see the heads nodding, right? Because they're like, okay, this isn't necessarily what I expected when a chaplain comes in. And then we go from there. But I think it is important to diffuse that in some cases right off the bat, because there are people that are like, I don't want to be at a spirituality group. I don't want, and I get that. I 100%, and I try to acknowledge that at the outset. This is not what you're expecting, right? It's going to be something different.
So many people have the experience of spirituality and religion primarily having the function of telling them what's wrong with them.
Exactly.
And to turn that on its head, I really appreciate what you guys are doing to turn that idea on its head.
So I noticed that we're just about at our time boundary, and I wanted to be able to say thank you to Brian and Bill. You gave us a lot of information and a lot of stuff to think about. So we'll be happy to make the PowerPoint and slides, whatever you send us, available to people that signed up. And the recording will be up on our website probably by tomorrow or certainly by Monday. And I'm glad everybody was here. Our next Lunch and Learn is in January, and we're going to have the faith community leaders from Heritage Christian Services are going to come and talk to us about their model of spiritual caregiving and ways to include people with disabilities, developmental disabilities in faith communities. So I hope that you can join us for that conversation as well. And thanks for being here.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate you.